G'day folks, ZiggyD here and welcome to Actually Realistic Farming. I love those videos people do, like, you know, the classic, I made 800 divines by dragging my sack across gravel for 100 hours, 8 divines an hour, best fastest farming strategy, you know, that sort of thing. But the problem I find with that sort of content is that they're usually running cracked builds with amazing gear, doing things in 15 minutes that take normal players 45 minutes. And that makes the gravel sacking seem a lot less painful and a lot more profitable than it really is. As fun as they are, these videos often do set unrealistic expectations, and it's not very helpful when everything you look at says 10 divine an hour is normal for farming, when beginners get something more typically like 1 to 3 divines an hour. So I want to make some actually realistic evaluations of things that beginners can farm. I'm not going to clickbait you with lofty promises of getting rich quick and easy, as much as the YouTube algorithm loves that. The point is to give you a more realistic look at what you can expect with each strategy, and how to actually do the strategy realistically. So let's ask and answer the question, what's actually realistic when farming the Trial of Sekhemas? Trial of Sekhemas is extremely low cost to run to the point that it's almost free. Level 80 Djinn barriers are 1 exalt each, even brought in bulk. You just message someone who's selling and most people have like a stash tub full of them that they don't need. So you'd be like, got any more? I'll buy 20 off you. And that goes down pretty easily and quickly. Whatever you make farming Trial of Sekhemas is basically, as a result, pure profit. It's pretty much impossible for it to not be profitable at this cost. The real questions are though, can you do it consistently without failing? How long does it take? And how much do you get from a run on average? Because those are the questions that determine how worthwhile Sekhemas is to farm compared to basic mapping. It's established that it's going to be profitable, right? But is it actually worth your time? Level 80 Sekhemas farming is super easy once you're set up. If you're at around the point where you're doing pretty normal Regal and Go tier 15 maps, you're going to be good to go. If you need to know more about like the basic strategy and just getting your first 4-floor kill so that you can get your ascendancy, then check out my actual Sekhemas Ascension guide for the full details on that. But when it comes time to farm, the relic strategy makes completions nearly a sure thing on even low to mid tier builds. That's because with relics we can basically guarantee that we get nearly every single boon by the end, which just makes you so powerful. I didn't fail once in 12 runs. I didn't really even come close. I had maybe 2 or so runs where I had to try a bit harder at times due to some bad afflictions or some really sloppy play in a particular trap room or something. Each time I had some of that bad RNG or, you know, a little bit of a mishap. I maybe got something like an early set of bad afflictions. The power of the merchants and the relics that we were stacking made it just very easy to recover. Even if you didn't like ascending in Sekhemas, I gotta say, the combo of relics and stacking so many boons is really bloody fun. It's super chill content with just enough decision making and strategy to keep it engaging, and the buffs make even a mediocre build start to feel amazing by the end. You feel like you're playing a better build. It's pretty addictive how much move speed and dodge roll distance you get to, and it can be a little hard to go back to normal mapping after a bunch of Sekhemas runs, so that's kind of a downside to consider, because your build will feel so fast and powerful in the trial, and then you'll get out and you'll be like, oh, this is what I normally feel like. It's the only content in the game that actually makes you stronger, unlike maps which give you modifiers that make the enemies stronger, or the Trial of Chaos, which just gives you modifiers that makes life awful for you. This one actually gives you good things. So you can scale it down to level 75 and still do 4-floor runs if you're not quite farming tier 15 maps yet, but want to give this a try anyway. You do cut off some of the big fun drops though. The upside of low-level Sekhemas farming is that Trial of the Sekhemas is the safest XP farming in the game. I die every now and then in tier 15 maps. It's just gonna happen. But I never actually die in the Sekhemas. Even if you do somehow manage to fail it, it's usually because of honor lost over time. You very rarely actually ever die. So that XP bar just keeps going up. You don't lose XP when you fail out due to honor, you don't actually die. The XP is pretty fast in the 80s as well, but it does slow down in the 90s, but it just still keeps going up consistently. So even when I stopped leveling at level 90 and 91, I actually made it to 92 doing this farming. So this strategy really wants you to farm level 80 Sekhemas, but it's got a pretty good solid progression path to get you there if you're not quite there yet. And it's probably the easiest level 80 content that you can do in Path of Exile 2 as well. If you're not sure which endgame thing to try your hands at, expedition, breaches, etc., this I think is the most approachable. Do you know what else is really approachable? Learning backend web dev with Boot.dev. That's right, this is the sponsored segment. They break down learning coding in languages like Python and Go into practical small steps that you can do in the time it takes to wait for a trade in Path of Exile. I don't ever promote something unless I've tried it out for myself to actually see that it's worth it, and learn. I've been learning Go with no background in coding, and it's been pretty smooth sailing. But today I did struggle with this part here. I just really wasn't sure what I needed to actually do, but the Boots AI is incorporated directly into the lessons, and it was able to look at my code and not just give me the answer, but help me actually learn what I needed to do and how it worked. Human help's available too, but I gotta admit, I kinda love the lower social pressure of having Boots like this. Also, when I logged in today, there was a notification of them admitting that their JavaScript course sucked, which kind of caught my attention. I was like, that's cool. They're making it better ASAP. I love to see humble and active improvement in a service like this to keep it as one of the best resources possible to actually realistically get a career in the field. So Boot.dev's got free demos of every course and a 30-day no questions asked refund policy for the subscription, which you can pick up with my discount code ZiggyDGaming for 25% off your first month or year. Let's get back to farming. So most higher end strategies for farming Sekhemas will center around using the Desperate Alliance unique relic, which makes the boss harder and makes them drop the unique jewels against the darkness. This is a very good strategy for profit because unidentified these jewels consistently sell to earn you an extra 1 to 2 divines per run. So that is really, really good. And it's actually not too hard, but Desperate Alliance runs, I think, are a bit outside of the actually realistic entry-level farming strategy. I gave it some good thought, and I think while you can certainly realistically make your way there to doing Desperate Alliance runs, I think the starting point, the actually realistic farming strategy, is to do just bare bones level 80 Sekhemas first, and that's what I wanted to start with testing to establish that baseline. I wanted to basically make sure that almost anyone could do this strategy on almost any build. So we aim to do consistent runs with no failures and profit off of the occasional boss drops or special Grand Spectrum jewels, combined with frequent drops of sellable relics, jewels, and rare items, along with a little trickle of raw currency drops. There's the fun of potential big ticket items, but it's not all a gamble. There's enough consistent returns that you'll get at least a couple valuable things each run. The initial outlay on relics is the only real cost of Sekhema farming, and it can range from as low as a few exalts to 10 or 20 divines if you really go hard on it. Some of those expensive options like double merchant relics can go for a couple divines each. The great thing though is that if you decide to stop farming Sekhemas, you can easily resell any expensive relics you have to recoup most of that outlay cost. For my runs, I started with some basic relics that I had self-found, nothing that would have been more than a few exalts each, and I purchased a few cheap extras for around 51 exalts. As I did my runs, I found good relics I then purchased from myself. 40 exalt for a couple of them, just priced on market prices at the time, and 2 divine for a great double merchant relic that I had drop as well. That was probably a bit overkill, but it made the runs slightly faster right at the end. So let's talk about where the currency actually comes from. So the overview is a couple of expensive boss relics, grand spectrums that come up every so often, an assortment of rare normal and timeless jewels, and then the relics that other people buy for their Sekhemas runs. And then of course some random drops, mixture of currency, map items, like the precursors tablets that I ended up getting a fair few of, and some actual currency drops. So the big boss drops are the Last Flame, which is something like 300 divines, which is how you get Temporalis, a very difficult and incredibly rare unique. You probably won't get this while farming. This is your lottery ticket thing that you may one day win, but maybe not. It's probably a very low drop rate in the 0.something% range. The Desperate Alliance is far more realistic, and you probably will see one of these every so often. They're about 2 to 3 divines each. When used, these relics produce the Against the Darkness jewel, which consistently sell for 4 to 5 divines unidentified each. And that's part of that kind of next level farming strategy that you can do for Trial of Sekhemas down the line. So you can either sell these or keep these for yourself to run in the future. These have something maybe like a 5 to 10% drop rate, depending on how many relics you get the boss to drop each time. And this is because the quantity of relics dropped affix on your relics that you equip can cause the boss to drop up to 3 relics each kill. So this is likely the best strategy for consistent returns if you can manage to fit it into your relic board and still cleanly do your runs. So that is a modifier to try and get if you can to boost your profits from how many Desperate Alliances you're going to get per X runs. And then another kind of like almost, it's not really a boss drop, it's from the actual caches, but the caches that say Spectrum will appear every so often. It's possibly something like a 5% chance to spawn per run. And these can drop several different types of Grand Spectrums. The Rubies are worth 30 exalts uncorrupted, Emeralds are about 200 exalts, and Sapphires about 10 divines. Just a quick reminder that any prices mentioned in any video like this are a snapshot of the exact moment they're recorded and are probably inaccurate 1 minute later. So always do your own research just to double check prices before you jump into a strategy if you're basing your decisions on that. Anyway, carrying on. So relics are a consistent earner with easy sales ranging from 10 to 20x of the middling rolls of decent pairs of affixes to multiple divines for some high roll pairs in the best possible affixes. So the big sellers for me, the most consistent ones were the urns and seals with just combinations of any 2 valuable modifiers, including high movement speed rolls, so anything is 6% and above, 50% plus defenses for all the energy shield characters at the moment, it's very powerful, more than half a meter dodge roll, 15% plus honor resistance, 20% life or 25% max honor, or ones with more than 15% relic drop chance. So any combos of those were valuable, but the most valuable ones were typically things like relic drop chance with movement speed, because almost anyone wants potentially several of those relics. Movement speed plus dodge roll, it's really good to have at least 1 dodge roll relic. Relic chance and high defenses due to the popularity of energy shield. Other ones that were big sellers as well and were higher value when they did land were the amphora and tapestries. So these are the 3 wide or 3 tall relics, and the ones on these that are the big money are the additional merchant choices and the merchant cost reduction. So those two combined together especially can be several divines, especially if they get high rolls like 3 merchant choices and more than 7% cost reduction is very valuable. You can, however, get valuable ones with just one of those affixes if it's also paired with honor resistance or max honor, or even bosses take increased damage is quite good too. That's good for people doing the against the darkness runs. The large relics, the vases, coffers, and incenses, I did not sell a single one in all of the runs I've basically ever done. In theory, some of the combinations are good, but unless you get max rolls of a good combo, you are seemingly just unable to sell them even for like 5 to 10 exalts. I didn't sell a single one. So if you're going to leave any of them on the ground, the large relics potentially are ones to just not worry too much about currently. Hopefully this changes in the future, and it may as strategies and the modifiers, potentially a balance changed or something like that. Now, jewels can be a pretty consistent seller, but they are inherently a little bit difficult to identify, evaluate, and sell. And that's because jewels are somewhat meta-specific in terms of knowledge. Having a good knowledge of several different popular builds is really helpful when it comes to pricing jewels, but I will give you some rundown on some of the more valuable things that you can just keep an eye out for. And you can always do a simplified strategy where you put all of your jewels that you think are good in a tab listed for 1 divine, and then after a while, if that tab doesn't sell, you can lower the price to like, 90 exalts and then lower it to 80 and so on over time until you sell most of them. That's a good and more ethical way to sell things without having to necessarily price check everything. And when it comes to jewels, the sky is the limit for potential value as well. You can get jewels worth many divines potentially. So for all of your jewels, you want to follow roughly this strategy. You want to identify everything, and then you want to augment any magic jewels so that they have 2 properties. Then you want to take a look at the rares, and you can either exalt anything that you think looks good up to 4 properties, or anything at all up to 4 properties. If you're not sure what looks good yet, you can just exalt everything. With exalts being so low cost, it's not a bad idea just to slap an exalt in every jewel that's missing a 4th modifier. Especially because a lot of 3 affix jewels can be quite valuable, so if there's 2 good ones on a rare and you exalt a 3rd good one, that can be well worth the gamble. Then you want to check any of the magic jewels that you have to see if they're any good for builds using the Adorned. So the Adorned is unique that specifically wants magic jewels, so sometimes these can be more valuable than a rare jewel. The good news is that it's pretty easy to price check 2-stat jewels. You can just check both affixes specifically and just make sure that you're searching magic jewels only. And then if you see something that's like a divine or 100 exalts, then consider that it might actually be a good one for the Adorned, and it may be better for you to not regal it and sell it as is. Any 2-stat magic jewels that you have that aren't worth a bunch of money, after you check this if you think they look interesting, then you can regal and exalt them up to rares to see if they become worth anything then. So here's what you're looking for in terms of regular jewel modifiers. Any grouping of energy shield, crit multi, mana, stun, energy shield modifiers, cast speed, any kind of grouping of those things, 3 or 4 affixes of those together can be quite valuable for currently popular spellcaster, energy shield, might ever matter, archmage, that sort of stuff. Minion modifiers in particular can be quite valuable. Minion builds do tend to lean on jewels quite a bit, so minion damage and minion crit. A particularly valuable modifier in general is 2% mana on kill, but certainly combined with other good modifiers is where it starts to get very valuable. High roll aura effect or high roll curse effect can be quite valuable as well. And then a particular one to keep an eye out for, especially for magic jewels for the Adorned, is effect of quivers. That modifier is used by several builds and treasured highly for them in high rolls on magic jewels, especially for the Adorned. Shock magnitude can be quite valuable, and things that are synergistic such as lightning penetration with lightning damage and elemental damage. Synergistically paired damage scaling modifiers are generally quite valuable. Now, when it comes to timeless jewels, things are a little bit more complicated and hard to judge, and indeed a lot of players don't currently know timeless jewels are even an option for their builds, let alone what to look for on them. So I think they're actually a little bit underrated and underpriced at the moment for at least low to mid tier power timeless jewels, but really well rolled ones are big money because the cashed up players that can afford those things know how to look for them. So it's still very much worth looking at the timeless jewels because the potential of them is very high. Generally speaking, you're looking for increased effective passives in radius as well as upgraded radiuses. Those are two of the most important things. And then it's in general multiple well-rolled synergistic modifiers, especially combined with those radius or effect modifiers. Another one to keep an eye out for though is high cooldown. This is very good for temporalis builds. One thing to note is that the Adorned does not work for time lost to jewels. If you see any information to the counter, that was bug fixed. So now let's talk about strategy, our strategy for runs. The relic strategy is the first most important thing you want to get out of the way and sorted, and the most important modifiers on your relics are merchant options and cost. Mostly, I will say merchant options. A couple of cost reduction relics is helpful for making it so that you have to do less kind of merchant visits and less effort into accruing water in order to take advantage of them. But merchant options alone is so powerful that you can usually use it to get things that boost how much water you get and cost reduction at the merchant, like Silver Tongue, so that you can then easily get all the other boons you need, even if you don't have a ton of cost reduction. There are strategies that go for like max cost reduction to make the merchant free, and this is really fun, but it's massive overkill. You really don't need that. A lot of the time I can get basically every single boon in the game with just like 10 or 20% cost reduction to make it more convenient. The next most important modifier after merchant options is maximum honor resistance. Unless you're really, really good at it, you still want to aim for around 75%, which is the cap. This just makes you take so much less damage that it makes it really easy to not fail. Movement speed is the next most important thing because it makes your runs faster, and faster is more profitable, more worthwhile, as well as it making it safer, easier to get through traps, easier to avoid bosses, and especially that last boss with the time freeze phase, having 10 to 20% increased movement speed on relics means that you basically can't fail it. I do recommend at least one dodge roll increasing relic that combined with increased movement speed means that you can actually just cheat a lot of the traps and roll straight through them. And then the next more important things are relic quantity. This is a good profit boosting one. It doesn't actually help you succeed at the trials, but it does make them more profitable with a chance of the boss dropping an additional unique relic. Increased key drop is not actually as important as I thought it would be because a lot of the time you get enough keys such that you can open any of the good caches that come up. So the extra keys are usually just kind of spent on mediocre to bad extra caches that aren't really going to get you much a lot of the time. It's kind of nice to have one decent increased key drop roll just to kind of help ensure that you always have a gold key handy. And then things like increased sacred water, maximum honor, life and defenses all help make the runs a bit easier, but generally aren't very necessary if you have a bunch of increased merchant options and maxed honor resistance as well as some movement speed. So let's talk about the overall strategy. Boons and afflictions is kind of what it's all about, and the merchant is everything. Get water and visit the merchant as early as you can and as often as you can. Remember that you don't need to spend all of the water each time you visit the merchant just for the sake of it. Just get the good stuff and visit the next merchant and save your water for that next visit. You can learn the core boon and affliction strategy and all of the options available to you in my Sekhemas Ascendancy guide, but here's the farming priority list that I developed over the course of my runs that worked quite consistently. So these are the ones you want to get as soon as possible in order. Silver Tongue is the highest priority. This reduces the merchant prices and makes it easy to stack all of the other boons. Harefoot is the next most important one because the earlier you get this, the faster the run is overall. Enchanted Urn increases your relic effect with our relics being so powerful. That is a really nice thing to have. And then Silver Chalice for major boon conversions. This allows you to take bad minor boons and convert them into major boons, which are just so powerful. Flood in Rivers gets you 50% more water, so it's a good one to get early on. And the Scrying Crystal makes the runs a bit easier overall, makes it a bit easier to avoid bad afflictions and go for slightly better room layouts to make your runs faster. And then two boons that you want to make sure that you have right at the very end, or by the end. You don't need to get them early, but you do want to have them for the final boss to speed it up dramatically. And that is Ornate Dagger for 50% more damage and Sanguine Vial for 30% monster life. Make sure, just as some tips, use the Balbala's gift whenever possible to buy more expensive options, but it's not always worth it. Quite often it's expensive on its own, so only buy it if there's something worth getting that is more expensive than the Balbala's gift. You want to grab Upward Path, 10% water per room, or Diverted River, which is more water on this floor, opportunistically when it makes sense to do so. Don't get Diverted River, more water on this floor, at the end of a floor after killing the boss, because that doesn't work. You just go to the next floor and it disappears. And then for Afflictions, it's really simple. Just avoid anything that contradicts the important boons. So things that like lower your movement speed, or reduce your relic effect, or make merchants more expensive. Don't get those ones early on. The room strategy is also very simple. The good ones are Ritual, because it's very fast, Hourglass, because it's fast and profitable, and Chalice, because it's fast and profitable. Remember, killing rare monsters in this is profitable. They drop good stuff, they give you more water, they give you relic drops, and they give you more keys. Killing rares is very good in this. The escape rooms are fine because they're quite fast if you have good movement speed, especially once you get the Harefoot boon. And then the bad ones that you want to avoid is obviously the gauntlets, because at best they're slow, and at worst they're annoying and dangerous. Do them if you have to get to a merchant, or to get to a good boon, or to avoid a bad affliction, but otherwise avoid them. Your strategy for looting caches are, in rough order, Spectrum is the highest priority, but they're very rare. Just keep an eye out for them. These give you the Grand Spectrums, which can be very valuable. The Time Lost ones are somewhat rare, and these give you your Time Lost jewels. The Royal ones give you your regular jewels, and I will say the quality of the cache doesn't matter for these, so just get any of them. The lower ones can drop magic jewels, which are actually sometimes more valuable for the Adorned builds. Then Arcanist for currency drops. A lot of the time you just get augments or transmutes, but you know, these can drop you divines and exalts and stuff like that too. It's always a slot machine in the end. Consistent earners are the small and medium relic caches. Don't go for the large ones, they're not worth it. And then if you have no other choices, the mysterious caches are just a gamble of pure random stuff. So from these you can get things like relics or random currency. And one thing to make sure that you keep an eye out for amongst all of the like regular gear caches is to grab the amulet caches if they come up, because some even normal amulets can be very valuable, and amulets in general are a good, valuable, rare item to try and identify. So how long did my runs take overall? I did a mixture of half of my runs or so on stream and half of my runs also off stream while recording. And the difference is rather stark between the two. You can see how easily I am distracted on stream. My average on stream was about 45 minutes, but it was as slow as 54 if I got distracted. And then my average off-stream runs were 40 minutes, and by the end I was starting to get down to like 37 minutes. And I do think that I could get under 35 minutes if I actually try hard it a bit. But I think 40 minutes is a pretty good rule of thumb for how long it's going to take like the average player on a regular build that isn't teleporting around, or isn't using Temporalis, or isn't killing the boss in 1 second. I think a thing that slowed me down a fair bit was that I probably put a lot more effort into careful decision making than I actually needed to most of the time. I was putting effort into getting things, getting water for extra boons that I didn't really need. As you develop a bit more confidence in your runs, you will start to only get the core boons that you need, and then you won't need to farm as much water, and you'll find yourself skipping white monsters and stuff like that you don't really need to kill, and that'll overall shave 5-10 minutes off your runs. So, let's talk about the fun part, the loot. What did I get? So in my 12 runs, I got 1 Desperate Alliance relic, which I sold for 3 divines. This is, I think, about the expected return, not running much relic quantity for the double boss drops. If I did this again, I would run a lot more relic quantity, and I do suggest that you do, because that would boost this number a bit and boost the overall profitability. I got 0 Grand Spectrums, which I think is a little bit unlucky and probably a bit below the expected outcome, which is, I would say, about 1 Grand Spectrum in this amount of runs, but that's kind of the way that small sample size and RNG works here. I had 1 Raw Divine drop, which is probably pretty normal for this amount. And I got 1 Double Merchant Tapestry relic, which was 3 choices and 7% cost reduction, which I sold for 2 div to myself. I got another one that was a lower roll, which I sold for 110 exalts. That was, I think, 2 choices and 6% cost or something like that. I did get a moderately nice bow jewel that I sold for 1 divine. And I got my first ever uncut level 20 skill gem. I can't believe I've played hundreds and hundreds of hours and I finally got one to drop in here, which I sold for 125 exalts to myself. But that was the going rate at the time. They were worth a lot more earlier on. And that's a big thing to note here, is that a lot of these drops were worth way more earlier in the league. At this point, the inflation has taken hold, but it still gives you a relative idea of things. In total, my sales of relics, jewels, and other random stuff, For Relics, I got 2 Divines and 289 Exalts of sales, and I'll put some examples on screen of each of these for you. Jewels, I sold about 1 Divine plus 317x of mixed things. And then from the other mixed rares and uniques and stuff, I sold about 375 Exalts worth of drops. I still had a few things left over sold, and after I basically stopped recording my data, a few other things that I had in my shop sold for a bit more than that, but probably not more than like half a Divine to an extra Divine. So, how much did I make? In the end, after converting all of my random gumball currency, I had 6 Divines and 881 Exalts, which fully converted was 9 Divines and 148 Exalts, or at current rates, 9.5 Divines. So that is 0.79 Divines per run, or in time, just over 1 Divine, 1.06 an hour. Averaged out to about 45 minutes a run to include some time to manage loot, because I think I took about 20 minutes per 4 runs to do loot. So about 45 minutes a run. So I think this shows a pretty expected and realistic result if you get just a little bit unlucky on a smaller sample size with this level of play. I didn't get any Grand Spectrums in this runs, and even if I had, the variance and the price is quite wide there, so I might have got a 10 div Sapphire, or I might have got like a 30x Ruby. But since we do know the rough drop rate of Grand Spectrums and their prices, we could actually estimate an expected return if you wanted to, farm long term. So the average price per Grand Spectrum chest that you get is 3.5 Divine, and the average price per run then is 0.175 to 0.35 of a Divine, roughly. So we can kind of split the difference and say something like a quarter of a Divine per run averaged out for Grand Spectrums over time. If indeed the drop rates do hold to the data sets that I've seen, they could be a little more rare or they could be a little more common, it's hard to say. But ultimately it's something like, if we average in Grand Spectrums, you're expecting about 1 to 1.4 Divines an hour, and without about 0.8 to about 1 Divine an hour. I wouldn't average out the Temporalis relics because that's like averaging out playing the lottery on a lottery ticket. If you get it, great. You can stop farming and retire. Whether you go by 1 or 1.3 Divines an hour, it's not an impressive figure. It's not something that I can chuck in a YouTube title or thumbnail to clickbait people with, but I'll tell you what it is. It's actually realistic. So, how could you realistically make more doing Trial of Sekhemas? Using Desperate Alliance relics once you get a bit more confident with it, so do some runs without, and if you feel like you're crushing the boss, then, you know, if you're killing it in 30 seconds or so, then this will make the boss significantly harder, but I do think it is actually pretty reasonable to try and aim to do. This will make you an extra 1 to 2 Divines a run, which is a huge improvement to your Divines per hour. The downside of Desperate Alliance relics runs is that it adds an expense each run. You have to buy the relics, and then you do have a somewhat high risk loss if you fail. Like if you lose, you're losing 2 Divines worth of relic. Probably the 2 most realistic things that you can do to improve how much you earn in your Trial of Sekhemas runs though, is to stack relic drop quantity on your relics as much as you can without making it too hard on yourself. So this can help you get that extra unique relic drop per boss, as well as more of the regular relics to sell too. If you get it up to 100% or close to, and then get the boon from the merchant that makes your relics more effective, then that effectively doubles the rate at which you get Desperate Alliance drops. There's not really a ton of downside here. Most of the time you can squeeze this into your relic strategy without costing you too much. And this is what I'd do if I did another set of runs. It could be something like an average of extra 0.3 Divines a run or so. So something like like half a Divine extra an hour or so. And then of course there's always the option to get faster. Sub 30-minute runs are not unrealistic, I think. And sub 20 is a thing that some people do, but that's really with like Temporalis, Blink Spam, or really top tier builds. But aiming for 30 minutes a run is already a huge improvement to how much you're earning kind of like per hour running Sekhemas. You can do this by stacking more movement speed on relics, making sure you skip gauntlets a bit more aggressively, killing less trash mobs, spending less time on planning, and just getting the boons that you need to and not struggling and putting in extra effort to get stuff you don't really need. So here's my overall thoughts. Sekhemas is consistently doable, 0 cost, and surprisingly fun and relaxing. After 12 runs, I didn't want to eat rusty nails. I actually wanted to do more. I want to explore relic drop chance stacking and see whether I can do against the darkness runs consistently. I kind of like this strategy unexpectedly, especially considering the somewhat tame 1 div an hour I was earning. Being pure profit with no real expenses, along with nearly guaranteed XP gains as well and no deaths, makes it a way to just consistently progress your character. So even if it's not necessarily super exciting all of the time, it's a slow and steady strategy. Depending on how lucky you are and how efficient you get, you can expect a 1 to 2 Divine an hour baseline for level 80 Sekhemas runs, We don't have any actually realistic TM stats for other strategies to compare it to yet, but I expect this will be average to low for low investment strategies. We'll see when we have more things to compare it to after future actually realistic farming experiments. But this is a pretty good starting place, I think, and it's super accessible. I'd love it if the boss had more consistent drops that were a bit more exciting, like Watcher's Eyes from Path of Exile 1, I love those. Items that are exciting to identify, even if they end up being trash most of the time. And I'd love for the caches to feel a bit more exciting on average as well, even if it meant like opening a fewer of them in total. I just felt like a lot of the time you're opening them and the stuff gets loot filtered out. So that's stuff I'd like to see GG address and improve in the future. But overall, I enjoyed it. Because unlike maps or Trial of Chaos, where everything tries to make your character weaker, the Trial of Sekhemas makes your character stronger, thanks to those relics and boons. There's a fun strategic layer to it that plays out differently every run too. That said, I do like roguelikes as a genre. Maybe you don't, and you won't enjoy this as much as I did. But I'd encourage you to save your judgment of the fun level of Sekhemas until you actually do some runs stacking shopkeeper relics. It's a whole different thing than your initial struggle to ascend might have been. Whatever you decide in the end, you now know what actually realistic TM farming looks like in the Trial of Sekhemas. That's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.